Okay, y'all, I got a One Piece battle for you guys tonight, and it is one that was already, somewhat shown in the anime, but it never, it wasn't really a fight. It was more like somebody was stepping in to help somebody else out. And I'm talking about Doflamingo versus Aokiji at the end of Punk Hazard, right? Doflamingo was, cutting down Smoker, and he was about to kill him, right? And then Aokiji showed up. And then he did freeze Doflamingo. But what did Doflamingo do? He broke out of the ice. Um, but this is what I'm doing, right? Is if he just stayed and fight, how that would have played out. Alright? We know things about both these characters that both Dofru uses, they both have hockey. One's a conqueror, and it's actually Doflamingo that's a conqueror. Um, and that helps him out in this fight actually. Um, but it's actually a little bit interesting. Um, so let's get into it. The strength, physical strength, goes to Aokiji. Aokiji, he's strong, right? He trained under Garp. He's not a weak ass bitch, right? Striking power is there, lifting power is there too. Doflamingo, he ain't hitting as hard as Aokiji is. Um, Speed wise, Dofi's fast, right? And he is quick. He's quick on his feet, but he's not quicker than Aokiji. He's not quicker than Aokiji. Aokiji's moving fast, right? So Doflamingo, okay, both of them were moving pretty quick during Ringwood, right? Aokiji got on the move as soon as the waves started to get up high because he's trying to sink the island, Whitebeard, and he's like he gets up there and he freezes the whole, area, right? And then that became the battleground. And then Doflamingo comes out of nowhere and cuts Orid's leg off, right? Little Oris Jr., cuts his leg off, right? You know, he doesn't really fly though, right? Aokiji, if you wanted to give it to Doflamingo, you can, but I don't see it, man. I got Aokiji with speed. Durability, I'm also giving it to Aokiji. Aokiji, he can take damage, but it's not that easy to damage him compared to Doflamingo. Doflamingo was getting, actually getting pieced up by Luffy and Law, right? When they ended up fighting them. Um, and he was like coughing up blood and all kinds of shit, right? He even had to repair his insides, right? Because of how much damage they did to him, right? Aokiji, if he was in that situation, he probably wouldn't, get internal damage done to him. He'd probably just get some scrapes, some scratches, and that's about it. So durability goes to him. Endurance wise, it goes to Aokiji, and it's by a lot, bro. Because Aokiji fought for 10 days against Akainu. That's why Punk has it's the way it is because of his fight. And Doflamingo, he fought against the law and Luffy, but that was in 10 days. That was like fucking, that might have only been like 10 minutes. You know, now it was like a whole bunch of episodes, but you know, in their time, it was probably only about 10 minutes. But he fought for like 10 days. So I gotta give that to Aokiji. And then when it comes to intelligence, I actually have to give it to Doflamingo. This man has like a network of people. He knows what's going on. He knows what's, being said. He used to be a celestial dragon and then he rose back to basically, he had to come get it out of the mud, basically. And he, has his family, around him. He's organized all that shit. I mean, at the end of Dressrosa, he was kind of, crazy about that shit, right? But I understand, he, um, his whole kingdom was falling apart because, things weren't going in his favor. He wasn't that lucky. Like shit was catching up with him basically. And he didn't like that, so he decided to use the birdcage. But other than that, the man's actually quite intelligent, knowledgeable about the world and whatnot. He probably knows a little bit more than Aokiji does. But I'm not saying Aokiji doesn't know about things. I mean, he was a high-ranking official in the Marines. But Doflamingo kind of understands the, celestial dragon part of shit, and they kind of, do things, right? That they don't let even them know about, like admirals know about. So I have to give him that. And then when it comes to experience, too, I'll give it to Doflamingo because if you watch the anime, and I bet you if you read the manga too, you find out that Aokiji didn't have hockey until he was like in his 20s, right? Because like when Garp's showing him shit, he's like in his 20s and he's in the Marines, right? And he's like, you don't use your, hockey to hit that, battleship. And he's like, I don't even know how to do that yet. But a young Doflamingo was out there using Conqueror's hockey at age like 9 or 8. And then they found him and they confirmed, they were like, yes, you're a conqueror, you're a king. You need to take back what's yours. And then they put a devil fruit in front of the boy. And hey, man, the rest is history. So I have to give it to, Dofi, even though he's 10 years younger, he still has more experience with using the devil fruit and his hockey, too. And then when it comes to close skills, that's actually going to Aokiji. Doflamingo can do shit with his hands a little bit, but not too much, man. Aokiji with the hands, yeah, he's got that. Close skills. Range skills, I'm also going to give it to Aokiji. You could give it to Doflamingo if you want to. I mean, by all means, he can control people from a distance with the strings, right? But for me, I'm like, he could just basically break himself into ice cubes and then reappear somewhere else if he tries to get dumb like that, right? Tries to, grab him and shit like that. And then he can also freeze the environment. Range skills going to, or Aokiji, right? Recovery, I'm gonna give that to Aokiji. Like I just said, he can, piece himself into ice and then reappear somewhere else. As ice because they're fighting at Punk Hazard, so he already has the advantage in the environment too. And then the hacks, I'm actually gonna give it to Doflamingo because he's awakened Paramesa and a Conqueror. Now you might think that gives him the advantage, but it actually don't. Not in this fight, And it's crazy to think Doflamingo's a Conqueror. He has armament hockey, and he's an awakened Paramecia. Aokiji is a former admiral. He's maxed out in armament hockey, combat skills. We don't know if he has an awakened, Logia, but he probably does. But he basically knows how to use his devil fruit. Even though Doflamingo has more experience at using his devil fruit, it don't matter because the man actually made up for it, right? And he's actually, really good at using his devil fruit too, So he did freeze Doflamingo, right? And Doflamingo broke out of the ice, and they could have fought in anime. But what was he going back? He knew that Luffy and Law were towards, Dressrosa. So he's like, I have to get back home and take care of my fucking business at home. I can't let these, guys, be there and, fuck up what I got going on. So he, gone on his way. Now, in this scenario, we'll just say that they're stopping at another island beforehand and he has time. So then they do fight. Aokiji's gonna win this fight high difficulty, and it's high difficulty because Doflamingo, like I said, he's an awakened Paramecia and a Conqueror. The Conqueror's hockey keeps him in the fight longer. He kind of like will get a second win kind of thing. But like for me, the cold will just keep getting to him and shit, and he won't be able to like overcome it. Cause like this man is already cold, right? Aokiji can, like, god damn, this guy, he cannot, he can't get cold, right? But Doflamingo, he can keep breaking out of the ice and breaking out of the ice, but eventually he's gonna get tired of that shit. And we already know that Aokiji can hang for 10 days if he has to. Doflamingo can't do that. But the Conqueraki, it helps him, break out of the ice. And he'll be able to do that a couple times. But, once, they get going and they've been at it for a while, shit's going to get to him and he's going to be like, oh my God, he just fucking, he's winded. He can't do it no more. And that's how I see him losing. High difficulty. Aokiji wins. Let me know what you think in the comments below, y'all. Be cool, calm.